Hey there, hello, holders. Jeff Cutter Diamond welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10 video. And finally, we are done. We will be done the FIFA World Cup 2026 videos. So there will be pretty much no more World Cup stuff, hopefully. So we're coming to the end of the road, and we're going to be looking at the top 10 moments of the 2026 World Cup. There were a few moments that could have worked out, but they weren't. So we've got the top 10 moments. It's not the top 10 games of the 2026 World Cup. It's just basically the top 10 moments from 2026. Going on right now. There is a dishonorable mention is about the whole visas crapola that Iran lost some of their training staff and a prominent Somalian referee was not allowed to take part because of some alleged ties, but which were crapola as always. But the fact of the matter was that the referee got rewarded with doing what they call the UEFA Super Cup. As Aston Villa, who won Europa, the second tier English club competition, and whoever won the first tier competition, that's Paris Saint Germain, who went back to back Applejacks, would play in a one game match just for the Super Cup. So he got that. Anyway, here we go. Number 10 is the atmosphere of the three countries. When you look at everything, all three countries did their jobs. It was actually shocking to see that the US would actually have a shared bid with Mexico and Canada for that matter, as there's been a lot of tension with those countries for decades, not just now. But the fact is, they beat Morocco for the vote, and it was huge to not only have a, a co hosting thing, which only happened once before in 2002, but to actually put up three teams and all that. Three pretty good teams. The Americans, known for being to almost every World Cup since 1990, missing one in 2018. Mexico for their streak of actually making the knockout stages, which from 1978 to 2018, which was amazing. I didn't even realize that. Well, of course, Mexico missed the 90 World Cup. Mexico. And then you got Canada, which, of course, in 1986 and 2022, the only two times Canada went to the World Cup, but they improved themselves. But the atmospheres were big. You had the pre-game ceremonies for about all three opening games: Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Especially Michael Bublé saying "Oh Canada" and all that. No, sorry, Alanis Morissette singing "Oh Canada." Isn't it ironic? Number 9 is the crowds. Now the crowds were pretty cool. No major fan violence, but the fact is the attendance at these games was amazing. Of course, the Americans with all their stadiums, with Razzmatazz of Dallas, Houston, Los Angeles, and Miami, among others, there was nearly no empty seats. And with that mark, it actually broke the all-time World Cup attendance mark set by, you guessed it, the Americans in 1994, because the U.S. had the same strategy in 2026 as 94. Fill up football stadiums, change their artificial turf stadiums into grass, obviously you have to, and see what happens. Yeah, 94 saw many stadiums host games like Detroit's Silver Dome, Orlando's Citrus Bowl, and Pasadena's Rose Bowl that didn't host in 2026 like Houston, Miami, and Dallas did for starters. But yeah, it was just, the crowds were big. I mean, you would think that any non-Canadian or non-Mexican game in those two countries, in Canada and Mexico, when they're hosting, would actually have troubles filling seats, but they didn't. It was just all that. Number 8 is Canada's run. Now, not to say the Americans in Mexico, their runs were terrible, which they weren't, but Canada was the runt of the North American co-hosts, as I said when I did my World Cup series. The simple fact is that Canada needed to do something. In 1986, they faced Hungary, the Soviets, and France in Mexico, 0-3, but they only gave up 5 goals, including one to the defending Euro champion France. And then in 2022, they fumbled against Croatia, Belgium, and Morocco. They did score the first goal of their history against Croatia. We're up 1-0 in Croatia, but lost brutally. So, of course, Canada coming into it, they knew they had to face Switzerland. They knew they had to face Qatar. And of course, Canada got the luck of the draw because Qatar didn't really seem that great. So all Canada was hoping for was a victory over Qatar. because that would be big. Of course, the playoff between Italy and Bosnia and Herzegovina would determine Canada's first opponent in the group stage, and it was Bosnia of all countries. So they shocked Italy. Italy, for the third straight time, missed the World Cup. But anyway, yeah, Canada tied Bosnia and Herzegovina 1-1 and then beat the tie out of Qatar 6-0. A lot of people said Canada should have let up against Qatar, but goal differential meant a lot, especially after tying Bosnia. That was a battle for second place. Canada could not tie Switzerland in the final game, which would have given them a home game, a couple of home games potentially for the knockout stages, but it didn't work. But Switzerland got a lot of support too. But yeah, Canada beating Qatar was big. Jonathan David's hat trick, and unfortunately, Ismail Kone, great midfielder, just had to have his leg snapped by that tackle by Qatar. That might have been a difference for Canada losing to Morocco. Who knows? Number 7 is the 48 team format. It was kind of controversial that they moved from 32 to 48, especially with 48 not really being a round number like 32 is. Since 1998, 32 teams moved in 8 groups of 4. Top 2 moved on. Poof. Round of 16. Easy. You win Group A, you face the runners-up in Group B, and then BA, and then C, D, E, F, G, H. Simple. But this time they wanted more countries. Well, with more countries being involved in football and with Canada, US, and Mexico hosting, FIFA decided to up the game with a 48 team format, which meant that 16 more teams would move on. Many countries did actually get used to it, especially Africa and North America getting extra spots, in Asia as well too. But the fact of the matter was that it was a good tournament and all that. And it actually shocked a lot of people, as Africa had 9 of their 10 teams make the knockout stages, the round of 32. The only mistake was Tunisia. But man, it was just unbelievable and all that. There was a broader field, there was supreme runs, and many teams that would not have made the World Cup in 2026 under the 2022 thing actually did quite well. I don't think Cabo fared. I don't think Uzbekistan or Curacao or Jordan would have made it in. Maybe Jordan, but whatever. But yeah, it was a great day. Of course, the controversy was that how would they have formed it? The rumors there were going to be 16 groups of 3, and the top 2 teams would move on. But of course, there would be a lot of collusion and all that. So they changed it to 12 groups of 4. 12 times 2 is 24, and then the 8 best third place teams and all that. Number 6, in the words of the great late John Motson, the scene's so typically Scottish. Scotland had been to 8 World Cups without ever making a knockout game. 1954, they actually mistaken the climate of Switzerland and wore woolen jerseys. 1958, they were going nowhere. 1974, they were supposed to get in, but lost on goal differential to Brazil because they couldn't freaking beat Zaire. Well, what the DR Congo was known as at the time. Brazil beat them by 3. Scotland only beat them by 2. Well, they weren't first place. Yugoslavia was first place because they didn't lose themselves, and they beat Zaire 9-0. So that was brutal. 1978, they choked against Peru. They lost. They tied Iran, which they needed to crush Holland by 3 goals to move on, and it helped that Holland sent their B team in, but the Scots won 3-2, only 1 goal. Although Gemma's goal was big. 82, Scotland screwed up. They actually lost on goal differential again against the Soviets. The problem was Scotland gave up 2 late goals to New Zealand, and that actually cost Scotland against the Russians. 1986, they were kicked off the pitch by Uruguay. In a sense, 1990, they choked to Costa Rica. They beat Sweden. They needed to tie Brazil to move on, but they failed. And then 1998, they had a massive things. That was the last time Scotland made the World Cup till 2026, and Scotland beat Haiti 1-0. It was like, yes, there we go. But Scotland fell to both Morocco and Brazil. Brazil crushed them 3-0. Scotland was 1 and 2, and yes, one team did get 3 points to move on for the 3rd place teams. Well, everyone else was at 4, but that team was Senegal, as Scotland fell flat. Goal differential ruined Scotland, who were 1 and 2, and again for the 9th time, Scotland misses a World Cup knockout thing. The worst part is Scotland now is under pressure in 2028 because Euro is coming to Great Britain, and Scotland would qualify, and they need to get to a knockout game. They have never been to a Euro knockout game. Number 5 is almost every damn controversy you can think of. You have these stupid hydration breaks. Basically, every 22 and a half minutes, at the 22 and a half minute mark of the first and second halves, there would be a hydration break. Everyone would uh, fuel up because of the hot sun. The problem was not every game was hot. There were a couple of games in Canada that had rain in Toronto. But what happened is basically it was we do it for all the games or none at all. And well, you can't argue with that logic. You had few I had thinking about a few controversies. You had a few controversial offside calls that actually ruined things. One such an example is Croatia versus Portugal in the round of 32, because Croatia was down 2-1, and then they got a lucky bounce to tie the game at 2, the game in Toronto, the last game in Toronto for the World Cup. Not in Canada, but in Toronto. But lo and behold, there was a stupid offside call because the guy tipped the ball with his head by a freaking hair, and the thing called it offside. That was brutal because Portugal and Croatia, that game in Toronto was one of the best games in Toronto because of the fan base, because there's a lot of Portuguese and Croatians in Toronto, and you knew there was going to be some issues. And of course, you know who, the big controversy with him. The big one was, of course, when Balogun scored against Bosnia and Herzegovina in the round of 32 and then got a red card. He was not allowed to play against Belgium. Trump allegedly made the call to General Infantile, or as I call it, Infantino, whatever he was called, and pleaded for him to be in the game. And then his red card was suspended. A lot of people thought Trump had something to do with it, but the joke was on Trump, as the Americans lost 4-1 to Belgium, and we didn't see any Belgian tariffs. Thank God. Many controversies and all that, especially with goals being called out. And the biggest controversy, I think, was Iran. Iran actually had a winning goal called off on offsides by a shoe. This is my foot, and this is how close the offside was. Yeah, by this finger, like this. And Iran didn't get third place. They had to go through. So that was brutal. Number 4 is Argentina and their freaking Houdini acts. Well, when you look at the playoffs for Argentina and their 4 wins, round of 32, Sweet 16, quarters, and semis, they all had one thing in common. They trailed from behind and they pulled off Houdini acts. They actually had a tough time with Cabo Verde in the round of 32. Everyone thought Argentina was going to beat the shit out of them. And there's no David versus Goliath. However, David versus Goliath lives, baby. As Cabo Verde actually had a 2-2 tie with Argentina in extra time, but then a stupid own goal happened. Argentina survived 3-2. And then the next round in the Sweet 16, as I mentioned yesterday in my video, they were down 2-0 to Egypt. But Argentina showed the poise of a defending champion with their laissez-faire approach. And poof, poof, poof. 3 quick goals before the end of the game, and Argentina survives Egypt. And Mo Salah was denied a trip to the quarterfinals. And then in the quarterfinals, Argentina took on Switzerland. It was 1-1. Switzerland had a player controversially sent off because of a dive and all that. Argentina won that game 3-1 in extra time. Went to the semis, took on England. We're down 1-0, and it looked like it was coming home. England was going to face Spain. It would be a great final. And then France and Argentina would bump each other for third place for the 3rd straight World Cup, and this time for 3rd. Because they did meet in the round of 16 in 2018. Did you not know that? Regardless of that, Argentina came through because England was stupid with their tactics, and Thomas Tuchel did not learn the lessons of one Gareth Southgate. That's for fucking sure. Argentina won the game 2-1, and the air was deflating from my balloon. I didn't watch their plays against France. I'm like, why bother? England did beat France, so that was their 2nd best result in World Cup history from 66 when they won the title. And then Argentina in the finals almost pulled off another Houdini act. Number 3 is the shocking debut of Cabo Verde, or Cape Verde, whatever you want to call it. Cape Verde was a crazy team. They're a list of islands off the coast of Western Africa. Yeah, they pulled off a few rabbits out of their hats. I think against Zimbabwe. I can't remember who Cabo Verde kind of ruined. But they made it to the World Cup. And their first opponent, the mighty Spain, who EA Sports and many pundits, like myself, actually predicted to win. But somehow, in some effing way, Spain and Cabo Verde tied 0-0. I didn't watch the game. I think that was at noon hour, and I couldn't get off for work for that. But yeah, it was shocking. And Tecino, the 40-year-old goalie, got his Instagram support jumped from 50,000 to 26 million. Can you believe that? And then Cabo Verde had a tight match against Ecuador, was it? No, or was it Uruguay? Well, Ecuador and Uruguay. No, sorry, it had to be one of the two. Well, Cabo Verde had a 0-0 score. No, it was Ecuador, I think, right? No, it was Uruguay. Sorry, they had a tough. They kind of choked down Uruguay and Saudi Arabia to actually finish with 3 ties, which was enough to make it in for second place because of all Uruguay and Saudi Arabia did was score 2 points, and Cabo Verde was second behind Spain. So Cabo Verde took on Argentina, should have beaten Argentina. That would have been a massive shock, but no, they didn't. But praise to them. I mean, their debut tourney, they did quite well. I wish Canada did well in their debut tourney, but that's just wishful thinking. Number 2 is the chase for the Golden Boot and the World Cup record for goals between Leo Messi and Kylian Mbappe. So it was no secret that Messi and Mbappe basically tore the house down for the 2022 final between Argentina and France. What would we do for an encore? Well, they both scored key goals in the group stages and then in the playoffs and all that. It was not only a fight for the Golden Boot, it was a fight for the record for most goals scored in a World Cup as a player in history. Because that record was Mario Klose since 2014 when he scored that famous goal against Brazil that got him to the top of the leaderboard. However, Messi and Mbappe would switch a few times, but Mbappe now has the record because Messi could not score in the final. Mbappe was up by 1 on Messi, and Mbappe is still young enough to play at least a few more World Cups. So Messi, unfortunately, at his age, probably will not make the World Cup in 2030. Feel bad for him, but them's the breaks. And number 1 is the final. I know it was a shitty final. It's not really the best final in World Cup history, especially after 2022. But I mean, come on. It was a good final. New York/New Jersey put on a great show and all that. The Razzmatazz, Trump and General Infantile, those booths, which was filled with glass. It was a glass booth and all that. You can kind of guess why. But yeah, Spain and Argentina going after it. The Slovenian referee finally getting a major final all that to referee and all that. He did a good job. Spain and Argentina would battle each other. Unfortunately, Enzo Fernandez was shown a red card for his conduct. And Argentina were down to 10 men headed into extra time against Spain. There was no score. Worst of all was the shots on goal. Spain had peppered Emilio Martinez, but Argentina didn't do anything. They were trying to create chances and all that, but the Wayne Gretzky move. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And Argentina didn't really take the shots. People suspected they were trying to go for the penalty shootout. That was kind of the Brazil and Italy plan for '94 and the other World Cup final held in the United States. And we know about Baggio's miss over the crossbar. But the fact of the matter was that Ferran Torres, number 7 in the program, scored as Williams Jr., who has English and Spanish citizenship, decided to pass the ball back to he had the ball near the goal and then decided to make a back pass, which Torres got on the end of, scored the goal, 1-0. He was onside, and that was big. I mean, 16 years prior in 2010, there was another F. Torres, number 7 for Spain in the final, and that was Fernando Torres. Wonder if they're related. But yeah, it was a great final. Argentina didn't take the shots, and then worst of all was Argentina's behavior after the final whistle, as there were a couple of players who allegedly got into a problem thing, and they'll probably get a lot of FIFA discipline. And then, of course, let's not forget about Spain lifting the trophy and Trump trying to stick around and get into those pictures. But the Spanish people photoshopped them out of it. Well, your grand eagle gets you so far, Trump, and it didn't. So anyway, that's FIFA World Cup 2026 in a nutshell, and I can finally get rid of World Cup videos as part of my death wish. I don't know why I said that, but whatever. I'm Jeff Diving Into.